Open world games. Whether love it or hate it, there's something special about them. Instead of focusing on the repetitive cash grabs like Far Cry, Assassin's Creed, and Forspoken, we need to see these games for what they are. Bad open world attempts. They're not in the slightest representing the true potential of what open world games are capable of. For that, we need to look at games like Elden Ring, Dragon's Dogma 2, Ghost of Tsushima, Witcher 3, Red Dead Redemption 1 and 2, Skyrim, Grand Theft Auto 4, Fallout New Vegas, Spiderman, Breath of the Wild, Days Gone, and last but not least, Cyberpunk 2077. All of these games, to varying degrees, are attempting to either push the genre forward or improve on the existing foundation in novel ways. Putting gameplay aside for a moment, we'll start with analyzing the open world games on the basis of their primary strength: exploration or narrative. The core strength of an open world is their uniqueness, tuned for each player. How you choose to play Elden Ring is not the same as someone else. That sense of exploration leading to unique progression. Even more narrative-focused open worlds like GTA 4 and Witcher 3, when and how you will encounter these side quests and in what sequence you will explore them is completely unique to each player. Let me provide a more tangible example from one of the best open world games of the last decade. Elden Ring. But before I do that, let's remember it was Breath of the Wild that really hit home that open world games can be exciting to explore. I personally really enjoyed this new and fresh Zelda experience. However, after replaying the recently released Tears of the Kingdom, I can't help but feel torn on these games, especially after Miyazaki showed us what is possible with Elden Ring. I'm gonna be honest, Tears of the Kingdom was a big disappointment for me. However fresh Breath of the Wild was back in the day, Tears of the Kingdom was that much stale, repetitive, and disappointing. The combat mechanics are basic, the enemy boss variety is extremely low, it is so tedious to use the new mechanics of building and combining objects, and the greatest offender, the deal breaker, in my eyes, was the open world being copied straight from Breath of the Wild. The same map, as if I'm playing a modified DLC or a fan-made mod. The sequel's open world, although not exactly the same as Breath of the Wild, the additions are simply not enough. I'm paying $70 and I can't believe how I know where the Rito village exists after a few hours into the game. I know I'm gonna see the same Gorons hanging out on the northern side. I also know I'll be seeing the same goblins and enemies with the same gameplay mechanics copied straight from Breath of the Wild yet again. Especially when you take into account how lacking and repetitive the Sky Islands and depths were. What was Nintendo doing for all these years? I'm not even mentioning how the story is yet again not improved in the slightest, which was already weak in Breath of the Wild. Tears of the Kingdom is how you fail at creating a sense of wonder and excitement in the player. I'm not saying it is as bad as Ubisoft sequels. Nintendo magic is still there with creative puzzles in the shrines, weapon combinations and traversal options, and building structures. However, even with the strengths taken into account, as much as I look fondly on the Breath of the Wild, I'm very much aware of the shortcomings of the series. How I no longer have to look at Zelda with rose-colored nostalgia glasses. Shortcomings that Elden Ring completely obliterates, fixes, and improves on a much stronger foundation. After spending some time on the Tree Sentinel, realizing I shouldn't be here right now, I have started to explore the immediate vicinity and get some weapons and gear, just to level up a bit. But then instead of exploring the rest of the world, I've decided to spend about 3 to 5 hours on understanding the complex moveset of Margit. Probably one of the most mechanically rich first boss in any video game. See, Elden Ring and Souls games in general have incredible combat and gameplay mechanics. In fact, the enemy variety of Elden Ring is absolutely astounding. The types of weapons your character can use, along with complex directional dodging patterns you can learn to master the bosses, are, in my opinion, the best in the genre. The open world feels not just big, but also dense. After conquering the challenge that is Margit, instead of going forward with Stonewale, I've decided to explore Limgrave and fight with Agheel the dragon. Once I failed, I completely explored the Weeping Peninsula and finished the dungeon with the Misbegotten, only to come back and defeat Agheel. Afterwards, I've stumbled upon the Crucible Knight Evergaol, and after spending another 3 or so hours perfecting his moveset, I've decided to start the first main dungeon of the game, Stonevale Castle. This is what I meant in the beginning of the video. This adventure was completely unique to me. I have chosen to create my own adventure. I know some of you guys encountered this hidden chest which teleported you to Caelid, and you've had a bit of a tough time frantically looking for a way out so that you can fast travel back to where you were. Or maybe you've explored Limgrave first to be as strong as possible before facing Margit. As a very recent example, Dragon's Dogma 2 attempts a similar sentiment. Its open world design may not be as well crafted as Elden Ring, but it definitely uses a different philosophy for its structure. It succeeds in creating a different sense of wonder and excitement in its own way. When I look at this game, I'm feeling the graphical style of Skyrim and Death Stranding rolled into one. Dragon's Dogma 2 feels more linear and corridorish in comparison to Elden Ring, with open vistas and vast spaces to explore. This is another way of retaining that sense of curiosity without sacrificing too much of what makes level design in linear games feel so rewarding. Each pathway has branching locations you can choose to explore. Most importantly, whenever I find a little cave in Dragon's Dogma 2, I have no idea what to expect. It can be a very small location with some chests and normal enemies, or it can be a cave that leads to a completely new boss that I haven't encountered before. Whenever I'm in town, I have no idea what sort of quests I'm gonna find. A nurse can approach me and request 4 of these items, looking like your average fetch quest, but later dissolve into a mystery narrative like Witcher 3 that spans across multiple locations, trying to find evidence on how she might be slowly killing these patients at the basement rather than helping them, for a mysterious reason. Or how Sir Ludolf, a powerful man in politics, has asked a suicide mission for Sir Gregor to undertake, requesting to kill the infamous monster Dullahan, hoping Gregor would die so that he can make a move on his wife. After rushing to his aid, saving him, we're back in town safe and sound, only to realize Gregor's wife, who was outraged by this plot, has added a tinge of poison to Sir Ludolf's wine over dinner. On top of these, Dragon's Dogma 2 provides one of the greatest levels of variety when it comes to player combat options in an open world action game. Sure, the open world variety in terms of atmosphere is lacking. The game is mostly lush forests, deserts, and caves. And sure, the enemies, similar to Breath of the Wild, repeat themselves a lot. You won't be finding the enemy variety of Elden Ring in this game. But the way you engage with those enemies are profoundly different. With 10 classes to choose from, at any moment in your journey you can switch between these without stat penalties. How an archer plays in comparison to a warrior is starkly different. Similarly, a mage plays completely different than a thief. Almost as if they're all different games. Each class gets deeper and more complex with its own skill tree. Fighting the exact same boss with these 10 classes feel like 10 different experiences. Except for Mage and Sorcerer, they feel too similar, but other than that, this battle system is so varied, and seeing the same enemies over and over and over again personally didn't bother me nearly as much. This is how you create excitement and a sense of reward in a more linear designed open world. This is how you add depth into a combat system feeling unique and fresh in 2024 without copying Souls mechanics or Santa Monica's God of War. Speaking of feeling unique, it is time to explore my all-time favorite samurai game ever made. Ghost of Tsushima has been a spiritual experience for me. At the time that I've played it, prior to Elden Ring's arrival, it was my favorite combination of exploration and combat mechanics in an open world game. Ghost of Tsushima did not only nail this hard balance, but also was able to tell a very emotional and interesting feudal Japan samurai story that uses character-based quest progression Rockstar Games likes to utilize. Chapter by chapter, you slowly rotate different character quest lines via exploration in one of the most artistically beautiful open worlds with high quality animations Sony exclusives like to enjoy. Instead of a bunch of UI markers showing your path like in Ubisoft games, you follow the wind's momentum, or a fox to its den. You can sit in meditation and write a poem. You can chop bamboos, clean out some outposts. Unlike in Far Cry, it all feels very organic and integrated to the fabric of the experience. But what made me enjoy this game more than usual is the unique difficulty I've had the privilege to experience. When you ask most players, they will tell you that Ghost of Tsushima is relatively easy. Mechanics are not that deep, not comparable to, let's say, Sekiro, since both are samurai games. On July 27th, Sucker Punch has added the difficulty option Lethal Mode. It was certainly more challenging, however I wanted to see what the highest level of challenge would result in, so I've made sure to never upgrade the attack power of my katana, and never use an armor that increased my defense or attack power in any direct way, with no way to revive after death. The result? The most realistic, intense, and enjoyable samurai experience you can have in gaming. Just like how a real samurai dies in 1 or 2 hits, a lapse of concentration can spell your doom, and you need to connect your combos precisely because the enemies are no slouch, and the game gets harder and harder as my attack power wanes in comparison. I needed to use all tools in my disposal and approach the battles with strategy and tactics. Especially the boss fights. The duels were so demanding that it required lots of concentration, perfect parries, and dodges to defeat my opponents on this difficulty. I understand that this is not how most people played the game. I'm sure the normal mode feels much more forgiving, especially after doing all the katana and armor upgrades, and I can't help but feel sad knowing most people didn't experience that exhilaration and excitement that my playthrough was pervaded with. Ghost of Tsushima is one of the rare open world games that never quite bore me with its combat at any point in my adventure. If you haven't done so already, please play this game on lethal difficulty without weapon and armor upgrades. You will thank me later. Although not perfect, Elden Ring, Dragon's Dogma 2, and Ghost of Tsushima are fantastic examples of how exploration and combat-focused open worlds can feel so magical and memorable. Linear games do sacrifice this open world freedom as a trade-off to tell a well-crafted narrative and story.
Is that... Dad!
It also helps with both the level design and the pacing. But I think that it would be unfair to speak as if only linear games like The Last of Us attempt to explore impactful and interesting narratives. Linearity might have its advantages, but open world games can also rely on the storytelling component to strengthen the experience massively. So much so, in fact, that for some of these games, narrative can be its primary hook. Sometimes these stories are so strong that it is the biggest reason why you play them. Fallout New Vegas, Witcher 3, Red Dead Redemption 2, Spiderman, Death Stranding, Cyberpunk 2077, Grand Theft Auto 4, and even Days Gone. Before we get to the cream of the crop, let's take a look at maybe the most underrated open world game ever made. The textbook definition of a hidden gem. If you can just step away from the performance issues on launch date for PS4, especially if you're playing on PC, you will realize that Days Gone is combining the mechanics of Last of Us in its own twist in an apocalypse setting with the character-focused quest progression Rockstar Games is famous for. Deacon St. John is probably one of the more interesting protagonists for me. Something clicked with me, I don't know what it is, but I was really invested in his character, motivations, and pursuit to find his wife, Sarah, after being separated. Along with our loyal friend Boozer, all the remaining characters like Iron Mike, James O'Brien, Derek Corey, Carlos, Ricky, Colonel Matthew Garrett, and even Schizo felt weirdly compelling to me. The adventure was multi-layered and world-building felt very strong. The cast of characters was like how Red Dead Redemption 1 felt like with its quest progression, but instead of riding a horse, we're now riding a bike in Oregon, witnessing the fallout of a zombie apocalypse. In terms of gameplay, maybe not as polished as Last of Us Part 2, Days Gone makes a respectable effort nonetheless, especially on hard mode. The melee combat feels good, and the zombie AI is certainly not bad. The human AI, on the other hand, needs to certainly improve, but overall, I'm very happy with Days Gone's mechanics as a whole, especially the Camel's Horde mission, where I was woefully unprepared for in terms of ammunition, was so challenging on the hard difficulty that I contemplated dropping the game for a while after many failed attempts. Although hordes are super cool now once it clicked with me, my first big and challenging horde that was mandatory by the main story was almost gonna make me drop the game. But I persevered, and the next day, after lots of strategy and preparation, I had the time of my life with this horde, and it made me appreciate why Days Gone is such a great game mechanically speaking. This is the same case with Ghost of Tsushima, another example of how games are designed to be played on harder difficulties for my tastes, and I assume this is true for most people who take video games seriously as a hobby and passion. It's very likely that if you're playing your games on normal mode, your level of enjoyment and engagement with the medium can drastically improve on harder difficulties.
I want to tell you just what you meant to me before you lost your mind. Things never seem to change, but they still are not the same as they were yesterday. Babe, I should've got 'em yesterday. I wish you could see just what you do to me. Why don't you speak no more? And I tell you how it goes when nobody really knows just who you are today. And I just wanna go home, a place that I don't know, where I can waste away. Babe, I should've got 'em yesterday. Should've got 'em yesterday. Should've got 'em yesterday.
On similar veins, we need to talk about another studio, Rockstar Games. Out of all the Grand Theft Auto games I've played, my favorite has always been Grand Theft Auto 4, without a question. There's something special about the story Rockstar has decided to tell with Niko Bellic, the atmosphere, the characters we meet, the pacing and flow of the story, the darkness of its narrative, the relatable nature of people's struggles and their conflicted intentions. GTA 4 was not only a game way ahead of its time back in the day, but I can confidently say it still holds up, even to this day. It's a fantastic game, even by modern standards. The gunplay is certainly dated, but which game's gunplay can truly keep up with the times? You're not here for the gunplay when you're playing GTA 4, that's for sure. I know because I have replayed it recently with all of its DLCs. It was actually way better than I remembered. At least narratively, this is a game that rivals another of Rockstar's masterpiece.
Mister, you have a kind face. The kind I like to punch.
Red Dead Redemption, both 1 and 2. Some of you might say that Rockstar's game design is outdated, how overly linear it feels, going from point A to point B, getting your cutscene, a cover-based shooter gameplay, rinse and repeat. This design philosophy also applies to GTA series as well. And I do get this argument. Rockstar can certainly shake up the design philosophy in its games. However, I think it's important to point out the inherent strength of this approach. It allows you to tell a very strong narrative with deep and fleshed out characters, something open world games inherently struggle with, which is precisely why Sony exclusives like Ghost of Tsushima and Days Gone have been utilizing character-based side quest design Rockstar has pioneered. It allows you to create a very compelling and varied structure. It gives you enough time to get attached to characters, since one character's quest line can span over 5 progressive quests that opens up slowly over time. Their character arc has enough time to get introduced, matured, and resolved upon like its own short story in a novel. Exploring the world and slowly experiencing these varied stories and characters feels organic and real. I personally enjoy both Red Dead Redemption 1 and 2 on similar grounds. Although both of them do have some flaws inherent in Rockstar's design, I feel like Red Dead 1 was stronger in terms of plot and much more dense and focused as an experience narratively. But Red Dead Redemption 2 was also more complex and ambitious in terms of narrative. It had more varied and more interesting side quests. The open world was filled with more natural surprise moments where you stumble upon a quest completely organically. In Red Dead 2, Rockstar really aced that feeling of living and breathing open world that would still exist even if you, Arthur Morgan, wasn't there. Everything feels so alive and organic. Although Arthur's adventures with Dutch wasn't quite as compelling as John Marston's redemption story, Red Dead Redemption 2 is a textbook definition of how a sequel must be made, how it improves on the original's foundations, both iteratively but also revolutionary as well. Speaking of iterative improvements, we need to talk about Insomniac's
SWAT is 1084th Fisk Tower. All units stand by. Warrant is en route.
Insomniac's Spiderman, both 1 and 2. Peter Parker and Miles Morales' traversal mechanics are one of the greatest and most enjoyable I've ever seen in any open world. It was so fun to swing around in New York that I almost never used the fast travel system. The only open world that made me feel like this. The combat mechanics are also one of the best combo-focused beat-em-up power fantasy I've ever experienced in gaming as well. The animations are absolutely incredible, and with the gadgets under your belt, the combat flow never gets boring, especially on harder difficulties. Although I've enjoyed Batman Arkham series back in the day, I think Sony's magic speaks for itself once again. Insomniac is currently housing by far the best superhero game in the industry. That being said, I did miss the variety of gadgets and suit abilities we've had in the first Spider-Man. Insomniac tried to fill their void with the newly introduced Venom abilities along with parrying. However, I think the variety and the depth had suffered noticeably in the transition. The first game simply had more unique combinations to create your power fantasy. But to be fair to Spider-Man 2, I did enjoy how aggressive Venom Pete was and new bosses that was introduced to the game. In fact, the story of Spider-Man 2 was also improved over the original. Especially the final 6 hours of the game was absolutely incredible, even if it had a bit of a rushed pacing at certain moments. A rushed pacing that certainly Spider-Man 1 didn't suffer from. Overall, I do like both Spider-Man 1 and 2 on similar grounds, and in terms of power fantasy and traversal, I think Insomniac's Spider-Man is one of the best open world games in the industry, leading to a very interesting project by Kojima.
Heavy paws, dirty eyes, sweaty clothes, the routine that I've learned to understand and know. Play my tricks, fragile mind,
Death Stranding. This game might be the most unbalanced and weakest game in the list. In fact, this is more of a movie and walking simulator combined than a video game.
Don't be so serious. Don't be so serious.
But its world building and narrative was strangely so compelling to me that I can't help but think about this game. The final 7 to 8 hours of Death Stranding was so mind-blowing in terms of plot twists and depth of where Kojima has taken the story he was building up for dozens of hours has left me speechless. I did not enjoy the moment-to-moment gameplay of Death Stranding. Let me make that clear. I did enjoy the online single-player friendship and support structure that its foundation is built upon. That was a very unique idea Dragon's Dogma 2 also toys around with through its pawn system, but at the end of the day, it is a walking cargo simulator. I think its open-world nature gets in the way of the story that Kojima wants to tell. Even with the flaws, the narrative and world building was so interesting to me, I can't help but recommend it to you if you value lore and story in your games like I do. Just don't expect much from the gameplay.
Don't be so serious. Don't be so serious. Don't be so serious. Don't be so serious. Don't be so serious.
We need to address the elephant in the room. We need to talk about Witcher 3. What else can I say that hasn't already been said about this game? Up until the moment I've played this game, I didn't know the side quests of a game could be this high quality with such production value. The lore of the game is supported by Witcher's book series, and CDPR has simply blew my mind in how they translated this world into gaming. It was always so exciting to find a quest. Even the less exciting hunting monsters were engaging because it allowed you to learn the bestiary lore regarding the weaknesses of certain monsters, adding to the world building of the game. Of course, the time is never kind. Witcher 3's combat mechanics certainly are no longer that exciting, nor even the sense of exploration. But the atmosphere is still top-notch, but most importantly, the quality of its narrative and quest design. I still can't forget the Baron quest. It was such a multi-layered narrative with different endings. Also Triss's torture scene, both creatively and lore-wise, a complete masterpiece.
He say where Dandelion is?
Yes, but Triss.
CDPR really needs to up their game if they want to do Witcher 4, which I'm personally really excited about. On that note, let's talk about one of my favorite open world RPGs of all time.
Je t'ai rencontré
Fallout New Vegas. Fallout has always been a series that has been left in the dust, so to speak, after Elder Scrolls. And even though Fallout 3 had some nice ideas, it didn't quite grab me as much as New Vegas. Obsidian has truly upped their game compared to Bethesda's Fallout 3. It is much better crafted on all fronts. New Vegas as an open world provides one of the deepest roleplay mechanics, quest freedom, quest variety, and narrative enjoyment only rivaled by CRPG games like Planescape Torment, Pillars of Eternity 2, and Tyranny. To experience this enjoyment to its full potential, I highly suggest making your build speech and persuasion oriented in terms of stat allocation at the beginning of the game. I actually want to keep this purposefully very brief because I don't want to spoil anything regarding New Vegas. If you have any interest in what I just shared, please do yourself a favor and play Obsidian's magnum opus. One thing I can guarantee you is that you won't be disappointed, especially if you value narratives and side quests in your open worlds. Leading to the final game on the list.
Viendo a todos los envidiosos a la cara que me envidian, a todos los que me envidian, yeah. Rota demasiado caliente, seré como en la gatilla. Boiling, boiling, acuérdate que mi nombre es el más duro de la liga.
Cyberpunk 2077 on virtual reality. That last part is extremely important. Playing Cyberpunk on Oculus Quest 2 was one of the most profound gaming experiences of my life. Let me make it clear that Cyberpunk on a monitor is completely different than playing it on a VR headset. Two different experiences, not even remotely comparable. You would be nodding along right now if you experienced it for yourself, especially like me who had their first blind playthrough on Luke Ross's fan-made VR mod. This mod came out about 1 to 2 years post-launch, and I did not play Cyberpunk until it came out. That visceral experience of actually being there in Night City, riding your bike, moving your head to look at the world CDPR has created, this game is no longer that lifeless, bug-filled 20 FPS disappointment millions of players had experienced on release date. This was something completely different, and it's very challenging for me to convey how profound of an experience Cyberpunk on VR was, which is why I wanted to leave this for last. See, we've talked about so many open world games at this point. If you think that I have similar tastes to yours, then know that I'm very serious when I say you need to experience Cyberpunk on a virtual reality headset, especially if this is your first blind playthrough like mine was. I assure you that when the credits roll, you will leave that experience profoundly impressed by what you just witnessed, and realize that, unlike what Ubisoft makes you believe, open world games can truly be magical.
Cuando yo diga sigas todo el mundo con la mano arriba, con la mano arriba, viendo a todos los envidiosos a la cara que me envidian, a todos los que me envidian, yeah. Rota demasiado caliente, seré como en la gatilla.